Hey guys, so today in this video we're just going to go over our test review. You should be checking yours at home and fixing any errors that you may have made. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at number one. Number one says which books were read by less than half of the students. Remember, when we are looking at rational numbers, so when we're looking at fractions, decimals, and percents, before we can compare them, they all need to be in the same form. Okay, so there's a couple things you could have done for this problem. You could have made them all decimals, you could have made them all percents, or you could have made them all fractions, whatever you feel most comfortable with. Now, personally, I like to make them all decimals because then I can just compare the place values of the numbers, okay? So I know that 1/2 as a decimal would be written as 0, decimal 5, which is 5/10. Okay, I'm looking for a number that is going to be less than 5 in the 10th place. Okay, so I need to go up to my table and I need to convert these rational numbers. So Harry Potter, it says that 2/5 of the school read that book. So I need to convert that to a decimal. Remember, when we go from a fraction to a decimal, we need to divide. So when we use our horse and rider method, that helps us set up our division problem. So we know that the rider goes inside the house, the horse goes outside, and then we just set up the rest of our problem and we divide like normal. 5 does not go into 2. 5 goes into 20 4 times. 5 times 4 is 20. Subtract, I get 0. Bring down my 0. 5 times 0. 5 goes into 0 0 times. 5 times 0 is 0. I have a remainder of 0. Okay, so 2/5 is equivalent to 4/10 or 40 hundredths. Okay, here I already have a decimal, 42 hundredths. All right, for 75%, remember when we go from a decimal to a percent or a percent to a decimal, we use Dr. Pepper. If I'm going from percent to decimal, I'm going to move my decimal to the left, and I'm going to move it 2 places. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this percent sign. I need to move my decimal 2 places. If you notice, there isn't a decimal there. Okay, remember, with a whole number, there's always an invisible decimal to the right of the number. So I'm going to start there, and I'm going to move it 2 places. So 1, 2. So I get 75 hundredths. Okay, and the last one is also already in a decimal form. So now I can compare them, that they're all in a decimal form. I'm looking for numbers that are less than half. So a number in the 10th place that is less than 5. Okay, so for Harry Potter, we have that is less than 5, so Harry Potter would be one of my answers. Let's check to see if there's another one. Twilight also has a 4 in the 10th place. That is less than 5. So Twilight would be read by less than half of the students. Hunger Games has a 7 in the 10th place. So that is larger than a half. So the more than half of the students read that book, that would not be an answer choice. Percy Jackson has an 8. That means that more than a half of the students read that book, so that is also not an answer. So you should have gotten Harry Potter and Twilight. All right, number 2, you had to write a fraction, decimal, and a percent that could be between point A and point B. So I'm looking for a point that's in between A and B here. So your answer may be a little bit different than mine, as long as you have a fraction, decimal, and percent that is in between -2 and 4/10 and -2 and 1/10. So I'm just going to pick one that's in between. So let's go with -2 and 2/10. Okay, so I already have that written as a decimal, so I'm going to go ahead and write this here. Now I want to write it as a fraction. Remember, when we go from a decimal to a fraction, you're going to say it out loud, you're going to write it, and then you're going to simplify it. Okay, so -2 and 2/10 is how I would read this decimal. So now I'm just going to write it, -2 and 2/10. Okay, remember, when we have fractions, we always want to make sure that we can simplify it if we can. So I'm going to ask myself, what number goes into 2 and 10? They're both even numbers, so I know that 2 goes into both numbers. So I'm going to divide by 2 on the numerator and denominator. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So my fraction would be negative 2 1/5. Okay? Then if I want to write that as a percent, remember when we go from a decimal to a percent, I'm going to use Dr. Pepper. We're going decimal to percent, so I'm going to move my decimal to the right, and I'm going to move it 2 places. Okay, so let's look at our decimal here. Start at my decimal. I'm going to move it 2 places. 1, 2. Okay? Now, when you have an empty space there, we just need to add a 0. So this percent would be negative 220%. All right, number 3, write the bicycle times in ascending order. Remember that ascending means that our values are increasing. They're going up. So if our values are increasing, then I'm going to write it from least to greatest. Okay? Now before I can compare these numbers and do that, they all need to be in the same form. I see that I have 2 fractions here, and the other 3 I can leave as decimals. So I'm going to go ahead and make these 2 fractions into decimals so I can compare them. I have 1 and 2/5. Remember, if I want to change 2/5 to a decimal, I'm going to divide. 2 divided by 5. Use your horse and rider method. 2/5 is equivalent to 4/10. So this is 1 4/10. And then I have 1 9/10. I already know how to write 9/10, so I'm just going to tack it on as my decimal. So 1 9/10. Now I can write them in order from least to greatest. Okay? Now, the number that has the least value is going to be negative. So I need to figure out which number is the smallest. So to figure that out, you need to ask yourself which number is furthest away from 0. Okay? The number that would be farthest from 0 is negative 1 8/10. Okay, so John's time would be the least. The next time would be Tom. Negative 1 25/100. Okay, the next one, because we're increasing as we go, is going to be a positive 1. The next time, if we compare here our tens place, the one that is the smallest would be 4, so that would come next. 1 4/10 or 1 2/5. And then the largest, the one with the greatest value, would be 1 9/10. Okay? Remember that ascending means to go up, so you're going from least to greatest. All right, number 4, write a true statement about 10/5 or 10/5. Okay, so there's a couple things you could have written down or could have noticed about this fraction. One is that it's improper, and that's a really good observation. That is a true statement. It is improper because my numerator is bigger than the denominator. You also could have written that 10/5 is equivalent. Remember, equivalent means that it is equal to, has the same value, is equal, and so is equivalent to 2. Okay? And how I got that is that, remember, when we have a fraction, really it's just a division problem. This means 10 divided by 5. Okay? So you could have also written 10 divided by 5 as your answer is 2. Okay? The horse and rider method, that just helps us set up our division problem. Okay? So remember that fractions, when we convert them or we change them to a decimal, we always have to divide. That's what operation a fraction is. It's 10 divided by 5. Okay? And when we solve that, 10 divided by 5, we know it equals 2. Okay, so both of those are some true statements that you could have written or noticed about number 4. All right, number 5, you had to write the fraction, decimal, and percent of the shaded region of the model. Okay, so first I'm going to write this as a fraction. Remember, fractions are part over whole. Okay, so the part that I want to write as a fraction is the part that is shaded. So I need to count which part is shaded. And if you notice, you have 1, 2, 3, 4. You have 4 boxes that are shaded. So that's going to be my numerator. That is the part. Now the denominator is going to be your total number of boxes that you have, your whole. So if we count up all of those boxes, you have 8 total. So 4 over 8. Now remember, when we have fractions, we want to always check to see if we can simplify it. So when I simplify 4/8,